saying anything, you guys did anything wrong and you're free to go kind of thing. So that was a really nice development. Now the Crown is still going after my colleague and I, but I think at least more people realize now we didn't do anything wrong. So.
Okay. By the way, I'm now restreaming on YouTube again because until we come up to a dangerous topic, I'll just keep playing the game where I'll turn YouTube on and off. But of course, our main platform is FacoTube, facotube.com. That's where we come on. And yeah, that's our main platform. And that's where all the comments go. And Dave J says, here for the Frank show. Frank, I'm really sorry that Frank had an agenda today. We usually do a convene on Thursdays, but I've kind of dominated, and of course the guests. So Frank, if you have anything you want to ask Christine Massey, let me know. If you're still there.
No, but I obviously want to thank her for her great work.
Oh, thank you.
Frank is in Geelong, Corporation of Victoria, Corporation of Australia. And
okay.
Frank actually is a Frank, explain to Christine, because I think she might be interested in all your work and research surrounding that group, that Australian group. Sorry, I forget the name of it right now.
Well, yeah, sure. There's a couple of you're probably working out for yourself, Christine, well and truly more than anyone that it appears that the governments of the Anglosphere are operating under the colour of law.
Yeah, absolutely.
Frank, lean into your mic a bit. You're really poppy.
Is that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, lean into it, man.
How about that?
Oh, that's better. Come on now. That's where you been?
Okay, I've got a new mic, Christine. It's nothing like as good as my previous one. I just managed to break my other mic, putting the USB port in. So
okay,
so in these groups are really looking at one of the key issues for the Commonwealth nations is that in the 70s, each of the countries in Australia, for example, we've got the Queen of Australia. Canada, I think, got the Queen of Canada.
It's a king now.
Well, even whatever it is, the key problem is that according to British law, the crown cannot be divided. So what that means is that the Queen of Canada, as at the time that these changes took place, I'm talking about, does not exist.
Oh,
so there is
okay.
and then the problem is further compounded by the fact that Britain joined the European Union and ceded sovereignty for some period of time to the European Parliament. All of these things have caused all sorts of mayhem. So it appears that in Australia that it's not likely that any legislation passed since 1972 has any validity at all. And I would suggest the same is
that's
true.
That's really interesting.
And you're saying the same?
Yeah.
It's almost certain that the same is true in Canada.
Well, you know what? Yeah, sorry.
No, it's please go ahead.
I personally haven't researched what I'm about to say that much, but I know other people have, and I know the whole idea that Canada is even a country with a constitution is challenged. I always forget the details. This is going way, way back. Apparently not the last Queen Elizabeth, but I guess it was her mother.
Victoria. Victoria. All the trouble started with Victoria.
Yeah, apparently there was something called the British North America Act, and then she repealed it, I think, before she died, and basically everything about Canada is totally fake. There's a website called The Myth is Canada, and this guy has Doug, I'm forgetting his name, but he's really dug down into this a lot, and so have some other people. And I'm always terrible remembering details like this, but apparently the whole thing is in question. And years ago, I heard about this and I tried contacting, this was before I knew about freedom of information. So I just wrote to politicians and I was asking them, like, can you show me the actual documents where everything was properly signed off, like, the correct number of people so that they had quorum or whatever was required?
Yep.
And like nobody,
Yes.
they never gave it to me. Like they kept acting like, oh, it's there somewhere. But so
Yep.
it seems like with Canada, the whole country is just completely like in question, and it's all. And I mean, then some people would argue too, even if it was legit in that regard, like still, who are these people? They're just people, right? Like telling the rest of us what to do, making these man-made rules and whatnot. But yeah,
Well,
and I know
it's
there's, sorry,
it's not
like,
quite that simple. What's happened is that there are mechanisms by which they've gained control, and because we haven't repudiated them, the assumption is that we have agreed to it, and so there is a process of rebutting those assumptions.
yeah.
And another particular fellow that I find very interesting is called Christian Remedy in Law, and he's
Oh,
on
okay.
a site called Canada is Penniless Now, where he's conducting.
Oh,
What is it called? Canada is penniless?
Canada is Penniless. Yeah.
That's a website?
And
Look it up.
well, it's a I'm on the wrong computer to provide all the details to Canada is Penniless, but he is conducting seminars about how to assert yourself as being in other words, the kingdom of Christ has come in his view, and that our king is Jesus Christ, and if you like, our kingdom is the heavenly Jerusalem above. I personally find that to be a very powerful system, and it's certainly, I think it's worth considering to that.
yeah,
But the
for
other
sure.
people in Australia,
Oh, Frank, your internet was the worst, and he was popping, and now he's gone. I just looked up Canada is penniless.com, and that domain is for sale. Only $1,995 if you want to buy it, Christine. But
Well, I know. Yes, right.
go for it.
There's another thing I came across a while back pertaining to Australia, and it was I could email it to you later. I can't think of the name of the website right now, but there was a guy who he ran into difficulties. He was trying to import a car to Australia, and he was running into all these crazy requirements that were being put on him by some Australian institution, right? Anyway, the more and more he delved into it, he came to realize that, how we are just saying, like, there could be like a quote unquote legit government that actually goes back to the crown and however that's all supposed to work. But he discovered, I'll just call that the legit government, even though not everyone would consider that legit. He discovered that there was a whole other side to government, like all these fake institutions, I'll call them, that they're just corporations that are set up and they don't trace back to that quote unquote legit government at all. And they're just basically masquerading, and like they use a whole, it's a great website, and he has a documentary about it. It was really interesting. And they use different logos, like,
Well, when did they do this?
the logo.
Because with the whole public health corporations, those are charities, and the biggest donor is the government of Canada. So they were set up as arm's length charities. So Public Health of Canada and Public Health of Ontario, they have nothing to do with the government. They're private charities. Did you know that?
Is that right? I didn't even know that. I knew
yeah.
Public Health is a charity.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
one of the sleights of
right,
hands that occurring. One of the sleights of hand that are occurring in Australia is that the government of Australia should really be called the Commonwealth Government, or the government of the Commonwealth of Australia.
Yes.
And they are
That's what this
issuing
guy was
letters
talking about.
and envelopes. In fact, my wife got one yesterday from the Australian government. Who are they?
Right.
Do they
We have
exist?
freedom of information responses from the Australian government, their Department of
Yep.
Health or whatever. And yeah,
Yep.
that's exactly what this guy was talking about. It should be the Commonwealth of Australia. And there are, I
should
guess,
be.
some institutions under that. But then you have all these other fake ones, and they even have a different, their Great Seal or whatever they call it. They're
Exactly.
basically their logo. They have a
Yep.
different logo. So
Yep.
what he started doing, you probably know what I'm going to say. Like, see, he started writing letters to them and being like, okay, I'll pay all these fees or taxes that
Yep.
you're demanding of me if you can
Proof that
prove
you're the
to me
government.
that you're actually like legit government,
Yeah,
you're part
yeah.
of the government. And they
Yes,
had
they
back
are.
and forth, and they would never answer his questions and
They're
just
private
intimidate.
corporations.
Now, that level
Yeah,
of frustration, that's the level of frustration where from there you start moving into the techniques taught by another group that I follow called Solutions Empowerment, where they say, okay, in that case, we're now operating under the rules of equity, where you ask a question 3 times. And if they do not provide an answer, then they are acknowledging that your claim is correct.
Right. Yeah, it's, I
Because
find like,
that back and forth that goes on is too frustrating otherwise. You really, once you've asked a question 3 times, that's it, done and dusted. You've proved your point.
right.
And
Does that
that's
relate?
the rules of equity.
Okay. How does that relate to?
Go ahead.
Does that have anything to do with because then there's the UCC stuff too, right? And people are trying to do things in commerce and send notices,
Yes,
and
correct.
often there's 3 times there too. So is that like
That's it.
the
Yes.
same kind of thing?
So it's it's called the rules of equity.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I'm not an expert at these things. I'm really pointing you towards these sites, and
thank you. Yeah.
I have used them to great effect for myself.
Oh, really?
In several times in issues with the government, and also in dealings with suppliers that may not be operating fully legitimately.
Well, in the situation in Peterborough where I got these bogus charges, the first thing I did, because I'm in communication with Christopher James too. I don't know if you know him, or Warrior Calls. And what he advised me to do was, the first thing I did was I started sending notices to the chief of police, the officer who actually arrested me, and the man who apparently digitally signed the fraudulent warrant that they used. And Christopher told me send it by email, fax, and registered letter, just to be as thorough as possible, and then wait a few days and do it again, do it 3 times. And one of the things was, saying like, you have until such and such a date to rebut what I'm saying with evidence. And if you can't, I'll have your tacit agreement that you violated your oath and your fiduciary bond or whatever.
Fiduciary duty, yeah, 100%. That is exactly it.
Well, what happened in Peterborough, none of my friends seem to believe that this is what, I'll just explain. So I was doing that. I ended up sending 8 notices. The 3rd time I didn't send the fax, but whatever. And I gave the chief of police and the cop until a certain day, and it was a Friday. And I said, if I don't hear from you by the end of Friday, I'll have your tacit agreement that you violated your oaths. Well, that Friday came, and that chief of police, he had just renewed his contract, I think the year before. There was some shady business there, but he definitely was not planning on leaving his job anytime soon. Well, when that Friday afternoon came, he suddenly announced his retirement effective Monday, and he was gone. That was it. That was the end of it. He was gone.
And they don't believe it was you.
So,
yeah,
but none of my friends think that's why he did it. Like there could have been other things, so it's hard to know.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with you from what I've observed.
I like to think that had something to do with it.
It's the same as before the vaccinations came out, where following a protocol put together by Solutions Empowerment, I wrote to our Prime Minister 3 times, and in the end I got a letter saying vaccines are not compulsory. This is before vaccines were even being talked about.
Oh, is that right?
So I
eh?
had a letter in my name from the Prime Minister telling me that vaccines are not compulsory,
Oh, wow.
as did
That's
many
great.
Australians. Yeah.
Wow. No, that's great. It's really important for us to learn about these things, and I've been delving
And,
into it somewhat. It gets a little like sometimes you hear different things from different people, and then you think, oh my God, I don't know what to believe, and then it can be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, or even court to court, or even just the human being that you're dealing with on the other end might interpret
yeah.
things. So,
Well,
so that's where it gets kind of scary and uncertain. But
my view is do your best not to believe anything. I do my best not to believe anything, but I'm certainly happy to test these ideas. And in each of the times that I've tested them, it's been successful.
That's
and
amazing. Yeah.
Mm.
No, that's wonderful. See, I was listening to someone recently. There's a man named Ken Cousins, and he has an organization called Pantera, and they've been around for a number of years. And what he's been teaching, he was teaching people to be really careful about that because, and I haven't fact checked everything he said, but he has this long document on his site. It's over 100 pages, and it's called The Overview of the World System of Bondage. And he goes over historically different, like papal bulls and different things that were put in place that kind of led us to where we are. And what he was saying was, we always have these emergencies. And I think it's, if I understand correctly, it's partly so that they can, in a so-called emergency situation, they can invoke these emergency powers and emergency banking and different things, right? But also they, going back to the whole thing about a corporation, and they purposely make the corporation bankrupt, and then they trick us into acting as surety for the corporate franchise that they created with our name and tricking us that way. So what he believes is that part of, at least in the US, and it's always hard to know what applies where, but basically in the Trading with the Enemies Act, first they specifically said that any people that are under their jurisdiction are not considered enemies, but then a few years later they added an amendment, or in some other law, I think it was an amendment, and they changed it, and they specifically defined anyone who is under their jurisdiction as an enemy. And the way they look at it is, and he says if you act in commerce, that to them it's like taking up arms, and they'll consider you belligerent, or what's the other thing, I forget. But anyway, so he was saying like what he believes people have to do, and he says he just figured this piece out in the last few years, is to not act in commerce, because to them any act in commerce, they really don't like it. And he said, you might have success to a point, but if you start having too much success, or too many people are catching on to what you're doing, they'll just shut you down and put you in jail. So I really that's where I get confused, and I don't want to go to jail.
They only like monopolies. Yeah. That's
and that's the reason why I recommend also this fellow who is called Christian Remedy in Law, because essentially he points out the same situation. He says that you are held in bondage through your birth certificate, and your job is to disavow your birth certificate. He talks about how to do that. He's essentially
website here, Frank? ChristianRemedyInlaw.org.
It could be, but I mostly use the YouTube site. It looks similar, but I will have to find
right. Yeah, that's okay. Let's see videos.
It sounds like it could be similar to what Ken Cousins talks about, because like he talks about you have to rescind all your signatures, and you can, because everything was done in fraud. They didn't disclose all the terms and conditions. Revoke all powers of attorney, and cancel all, terminate all contracts, agreements, oaths, anything that might bind you to that name. And then there are a few other steps. And he talks about claiming your ancestral estate, and that has to do with the Saskatchewan, that whole thing. Yeah.
It's called the Seti Act, and the Seti Act was issued in 1666 at the time of the Great Fire in London.
Right.
And in that act, it's well worth reading. I've actually published it here on this site.
Okay.
But the Sedicay Act essentially is it's an eye opener for sure.
Yeah,
And that's been
where
around
they
since
assume you're
1666. Yeah. So yeah, it
right.
sounds like we're
When
on
they
the
assume
same
you're
sort of
dead and lost at sea.
yeah. That we're on the same sort of track.
Yeah, I think
When
so. I
your birth
tested it out a
certificate is
little.
actually a certificate of stillbirth.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy, right? It's so insane. I got
But
a letter in the
these are the
mail.
things that led me to the Bible to just follow the Bible as
Oh,
my
yes, yes.
remedy and law. Yeah.
Well, and yeah, and
King,
Jesus apparently said, or whatever, it's in the Bible, different things about God is no respecter of persons. And
correct.
some people think that thing about don't, the graven images, not to worship the whatever, that's actually referring to the name.
Yeah.
Don't identify with that name.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very, very interesting stuff for sure. I got a letter in the mail recently. It was like from this Ontario Health, what is it? I think it's called Ontario Health, and they were encouraging me to get a mammogram. And so I thought, well, screw this. I'm going to respond to her letter. And I found some email addresses, and I said, I did just like a 1-page spiel. And I said that, I found out these things and this was all done through fraud. So I hereby rescind all my signatures and da, 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 da. And in the end, I told her, if you need to, she emailed me back and I was getting annoyed. So I said, then I assigned them as trustees. I said, I hereby assign you all as trustees in any public trusts of which I'm the lawful beneficiary. And anyway, I said, if you need to communicate with me, you may do so by addressing communications to Christine : living woman who does unbonded, unincorporated living woman who does not act as surety for a public corporation or something like that. And she wrote back to me. She emailed me and she addressed me that way: Christine, unincorporated, unbonded living woman of the Massey family.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
So, I think that thing of the trust, again, care has to be taken there, but certainly there is a straw man, as you're aware.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think we're gonna figure it all out and bust it all open, hopefully before long, because a lot of people are catching on to
I think the timing between the various disasters that goes on is really to distract people from this awareness of how people have been contracted, if you like.
Yeah.
Without them realizing people, there's discussions of freedom, but in fact, people are assumed to be the servants of essentially the Pope.
Yes, that's how I understand it too.
Not
which
the
is
Jews?
really insane.
Not the Jews, Frank?
Why are there so many podcasts from Jordan telling we can't blame the Jews?
Christine, Frank does karaoke. If you have any requests,
cool.
I'm sure he could learn the song quickly for you.
Cool.
But speaking of that debate, I'm still hoping to hear back from John Friend, who says the Jews did everything. And then we have on the other side Giovanni Cerrucci, who says all roads lead back to Rome, the Jesuits. So we're going to hopefully resolve that or get some conversation in around that. I don't have a Freemason representative to come on at this time, but among those three constituencies, I'm sure somebody's wielding.
Well, they'll probably both be Freemasons anyway. Both of them will probably turn out to be Freemasons.
Yeah,
anyway.
really. Now, one of the reasons I contacted you, Christine, other than just to get a general update on how you're doing, is one of the females researchers, and it seems like some of the best ones are female, is I stumbled upon Catherine Watt, who has the website bailiwicknews.substack.com. And between her and Sasha Latipova, who also has a Substack with some artwork at the end of each piece. These two, yes, Sasha Latipova, Due Diligence in Art. Between these two women, they really laid out a really great case that this is a military operation, Operation Warp Speed, or whatever you want to call it, where they have used the military to subcontract all these pharmaceutical companies, specifically Pfizer, to really create a military countermeasure,
Mhm.
which excludes them from all kinds of liabilities and allows them to just operate on top of the law and maybe go through a few motions to pretend that they are operating within the law. But of course, because it's a state of
Yeah.
emergency and they're the military and this is a countermeasure, none of the existing preconceived notions about vaccines or viruses are applicable. And I thought they've done a really great job and just laying bare all of the research, and they've just left it for anyone to take it and run with it. And
Sorry, I didn't get. Can you repeat your last line that you said about viruses or contagious? Sorry.
well, no, I don't remember what I just said, but they
Okay.
really
Right.
they were just what I'm saying is this is being operated under a military as a military operation, and the so-called vaccines are really called military countermeasures, which allows them to operate on top of the existing rules and regulations and acts because it's a military operation.
Right.
And the
Well,
way yeah.
that actually fits with what we were just talking about in the sense
Yeah.
that, like Ken Cousins and other people say, we've actually been under military law or rule or whatever you want to call it for a long time. They just
Oh,
don't come
forever.
out and say it. And that's
Yeah.
why so many crazy things are going on and don't seem to make sense. It's because they're operating under this whole other set of rules and pretending to follow these other laws. So I
Right, there's
feel
a
like what you're
yeah,
saying actually fits, except they're only going back a certain number of decades and
that's
focusing on
right.
certain things, but not going back to the whole thing about how it all
Yeah,
traces back to the papal bulls and all that.
I agree. This is a
Not,
huge deception that goes back to the beginning, but they're just going back a little bit to show you specifically what laws were created and how this is a military operation. I thought it
yeah,
was pretty good, and I
that
just
it makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. So that I saw you on one of the posts, or I think, you were somehow interfacing with one of their posts that were,
Yeah.
you were challenging Catherine Watt on her
Yeah.
belief in
So
viruses. Mhm.
yeah, so I'll just explain what happened there. So, excuse me. So I'm not critiquing her legal analysis. I'm not even haven't delved into it. I just have like a very superficial thing about that. But what the reason she got our attention was, she's talking like consistently about a bioweapon, making all these references to bioweapon or contagious pathogen, as if that whole part is real about the virus, right?
Yeah,
And so she did a presentation on the platform Medical Doctors for COVID Ethics. I guess it was like a few weeks ago.
yeah,
And so one of my colleagues, a couple of them were on, and one of them asked her because she was using her terminology in a vague sort of way, and people do this often where they're saying like bioweapon and you're not sure, are you talking about an alleged virus or you're talking about the injections or what, right? So he asked her about that and she was kind of like whatever, like both. And then she had been talking about, I guess, pointing out flaws in how they hadn't properly tested the so-called vaccines for effectiveness. So he was telling her, that he liked a lot of her presentation, but when it came to that part, he said it's kind of like you're talking about testing for the effectiveness of a unicorn repellent and nobody's shown that there's a unicorn, right? So he was like pointing that out to her and saying like you're missing the biggest, like this huge chunk of the story, that there actually isn't even a virus. Anyway, and then Eric Coppolino, investigative reporter, questioned her, and he asked her, he brought up the FOI responses because this woman is, doing all this analysis of legalities. She's a paralegal and she's talking about bioweapons and making, she has said on her website that she's read all these scientific papers as well. And I've seen where she even made a statement, I found a really strange generalized statement where she said that any biologically active product is inherently toxic, lethal, and aggressive, toxic, and lethal, which didn't make any sense to me. But anyway, my point is she's talking about legalities and she's delving into scientific stuff too. But when Eric, he just asked her, like, there's all these institutions admitting that they don't even have a sample of the virus. Would you comment on that? And she was like, no, and kind of with attitude. And then he was like, no. And she's like, no, I'm not commenting on that. And she just refused to, even comment on it, which was really odd. So one of my colleagues wrote up an article about this, and the point is just, it's not to attack her, but, we're on a mission to expose the fake germ, virus story, all of virology, and some people even more generally germ theory. So, it's like we're 3 years into this and we still have all these people that are on the circuit, kind of, so to speak, and talking still like there's a virus and just unquestioningly going along with that. And, frankly, we're getting pretty damn tired of this, right? Like, okay, you're a legal person and
so you think she should know? She should have known better.
Absolutely. I think she should know better. And she seems to be somewhat connected to Children's Health Defense, who have been very much pushing this whole narrative, going along with the story of there's a virus, there's a pandemic, the tests are legit, like basically going along with the whole official narrative, the lab leak, all of this. And we're just like, where's your science? What science do you have? And so Eric also asked her, some of the transcript is in the article here. So then he asked her, are you asserting there was a lab release of SARS-CoV-2? And she answered, I don't know exactly how they released it. So she's implying that it exists. And then she talks about maybe it was aerosol dispersal in highly populated locations, a communicable pathogen, blah, blah, blah. And then he asks her, he says, okay, so you're saying that not a lab release, not an accidental release, but she's hypothesizing that maybe there was something sprayed in key cities. And she picked this up from Jay Cooey of Children's Health Defense Science Advisor. And so she said, yeah, that's my working model of how they, got people hyped up about a virus. So he asked her, do you have any documentary evidence of that theory? And she said, no. And he said, so this is just a theory without probable cause. And she said, yeah, like that was it. So we have all these people that they just talking, repeating what other people are saying, but they're not actually doing their due diligence. They have no science whatsoever. And then when they're shown legal confessions from around the world, like, hello, they're all saying they don't have a sample of this alleged virus, and this legal expert won't even comment on it. So, again, we're not trying to trash her or attack her personally or anything like that, or say.
But does that make you suspicious of her, of her motives?
Well, to be honestly, yeah. And it's gotten to the point like I don't know if you saw how we also questioned Mary Holland, who acts as president of Children's Health Defense.
No, where did you put that? Where's that?
Oh, that was in my last newsletter also. I'm surprised you didn't see that one, because that one got a lot of reaction.
Is that on your website?
It's on the same. I think you have my Substack, right? Or you get my email newsletter.
Probably.
I can pull it up if you'd like to see it, because this one was more explosive, to be perfectly honest.
What's the name of your Substack, Chris?
It's Christine Massey FOIs. Christine Massey's Germ FOI newsletter. So what happened here? I'll just start telling you about it.
This was February.
Just before you go on, Christine, I would like to thank you for what you've done with that woman. Really, I think, as you have I think you are completely correct. The problem is the germ theory.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Absolutely. I mean,
anyone that's we know that there are always going to be layers of the onion here, and she's another layer of the onion to protect that germ theory.
yeah, I mean, obviously I can't say that I know that, but this is, I mean, there seem to be all these people connected with Children's Health Defense, Meryl Nass, Jay Cooey, Catherine.
Well, I can tell you that the mortality statistics for 2020 in Australia indicated that Australia had its lowest death rate in recorded history in 2020.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Isn't that crazy, right? Yeah. And then Denny
It was by
Rankor,
far the healthiest year of all time in
yeah.
Australia.
So how does anybody still go along with this story
Because
of a pandemic?
people, when I
It's
say that
just,
to them, they just argue with me, even though the stats are published.
yeah. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. And I mean, the reason we keep at this is, we know it's not just COVID too. This is going back over 100 years. And, like one of the things that bothers me the most is to think, especially in the States, like children are getting dozens and dozens and dozens of injections and they're coerced, to go to school. And
Yep.
parents don't want their kids to play with children who are not fully vaccinated. And elderly people getting a flu shot. My mom probably gets the damn flu shot every year, and and they're not on the internet finding out what we're finding out, and they're being taken advantage of and hurt. And there's so many layers to all the stupid things that happen because of this belief in viruses. So yeah, it's crazy. And Children's Health Defense of all, like, Children's Health Defense, hello, and you're focused on vaccines, like they should be all over this. And yeah, what happened on I think it was February 26th. So Mary Holland had done a presentation on that same platform, Medical Doctors for COVID Ethics. And in the question and answer, my colleague Bill he spoke to her first, and he called her out. He said, Mary, why is Children's Health Defense protecting the core lie, the core fraud of this whole thing? You guys are going along with the virus, the pandemic, And she just kind of went, oh, I don't think we're doing that. I don't think we're doing that. And then when I got my turn, I said, Mary, I need to know what is Children's Health Defense's current position on the virus? Does it exist? Yes or no? And if so, what science do you rely on? So I really put her on the spot. And then before I gave her a chance to answer, I reminded her of three things. April of last year, Eric Coppolino was at an event where Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gave a talk, and then there was a question and answer period. And Eric brought up the FOI responses and said, will you comment? And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's a whole shit show. I mean, it's on Eric's website, but basically he's like, he gets all flustered and tongue-tied. Like, you've never seen this man get flustered like this. He ends up saying,
sorry, Kennedy got flustered?
Yeah, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh,
He ends up trying to say basically, oh, I see people discussing this on our email list. I have a lot of respect for some of the no virus people, but most people seem to believe they exist. And I tend to think they probably exist. This is a man who has a whole book coming out any day now about the origins of COVID-19. They're all over the lab leak bullshit. Like, I'm sorry, but and he couldn't even come out and say, yeah, I've seen science. Like, I'm convinced that it exists. This is a lawyer who's supposed to be looking at evidence and who has a history of dealing with mercury and all these toxins and saying, I'm perfectly comfortable reading scientific literature. But then when it comes to something that's as simple as, did they do the scientific method or not? Do they have an independent variable or not? Oh, he ends up saying, oh, I shouldn't have. He tried to laugh it off, and then Eric pressed him again. And then he goes, oh, I should have just said, I'm not going to answer the question. So that was the first thing I brought up with Mary. And then I reminded her that there's a private email that's on Eric's website. Someone well known in the no virus movement, had written an email to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Along the lines of saying, you know, will you help us get this truth out? It wasn't, you know, the wording was different. But anyway, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. responded, and this is on Eric's website, basically saying, you know, I admire you a lot. You have a lot of integrity. I respect what you're doing. Keep going. But I have to beg off on this issue for now because the cost benefit ratio just doesn't really work for me. And if you guys get it closer to the goal line, then maybe we'll come in and help you. But for now, you know, it just doesn't really work. And it was basically sounds like just a blatant admission that if I go there, you know, I might lose followers. We're not going to get as many donations. Doesn't really work for me at this time. But you guys keep going at it. Well, we keep spewing all this bullshit.
You have to admire that honesty, don't you? I mean, the fact that he was so blatant, I think is.
Yeah, I think that is the honest answer, though. I think that is his honest answer.
It's honest, but it's quite disgusting. Like you're taking money from donors. You have probably millions of followers. They think they're getting accurate information from you. They think the no virus people are crazy because if there was no virus, Children's Health Defense would tell us, you know, Del Bigtree would tell us. So they're hoodwinking people. They're taking people for a ride. He gets $500,000 a year salary now. And the last I checked, she gets at least 180,000. I think that was a few years ago. I think she might be over 200,000 a year now to just like take people for a ride, basically. And I'm not really holding back anymore because, again, we're like 3 years in at this point. So, and the other thing I reminded her of was at the end of last year, I sent an email to her and Robert, and I attached the SARS-CoV-2 isolation papers out of China and the CDC study and one other. And I said, have you read the methods in these papers? And if so, do you consider them valid and scientific? And then I said, also, do you have any science showing the existence of any virus whatsoever? I was perfectly polite. Like, I was just polite. And long story short, and these emails I published also, she didn't answer any of my questions. She gave me some paragraphs that we found out later came from Jay Couey. And then she put me in touch with Jay Couey. So I ended up asking Jay Couey basically the same things. Jay Couey, well, I actually contacted Jay because he was doing like videos where he's trashing us and saying crazy things about no virus people. And so I wrote to him, I was like, you know, what are you doing? And what science do you have? So we had an extensive back and forth. Jay never once tried to cite even one study to back up his claims. And then Eric did a 3-hour interview with Jay Couey. And Jay basically had to admit, like, he doesn't have any science, but he keeps talking about coronaviruses and clones of coronaviruses anyway. And in one of his other videos that he had done, he admitted on one point, he's got this video is taken down now, but we have a copy of it. He actually said, virology for the last 20 years has been based on indirect observations of things that virologists can't even prove exist. Yeah, this is their science advisor.
I've heard that before.
So I said this to Mary, that's your science advisor telling you this. So Mary, what's your position? Virus, yes or no? And if so, what science? Well, Mary, she puts her head down and she's like rubbing her head and she goes, oh, I don't think I can give you an answer that will satisfy you. We're open to there being a virus. We're open to there not being a virus.
Is this it here?
Right about dimensions.
Are you
Jay Couey is somebody who has studied virology, and so I think he is and has been delving more deeply in that. I don't we're trying to cover the issue. I don't think we've stated that there is a virus. We haven't stated that there's not a virus. We're exploring what the reality is. And we clearly agree with you that there are very serious problems with the narrative. I don't think we have definitive answers on a lot of this. Bobby's writing a
Mary,
book.
with all due respect, your website is full of content about a virus, gain of function. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a whole book coming out about the origin of so-called COVID. You have not been dealing with this in a balanced way. You had David Rasnick and Michael Wallach on one time, and I think there's one presentation with Alex Eck or one other something on your website, compared to what, hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of articles, interviews, conversations about COVID-19 as if it's a real phenomenon. So no, with all due respect, you have not been helping at all. You've been extremely one-sided, which to me is just blatantly unethical, unlawful. You're misleading your people rely on you guys for accurate information, and they think, for God's sake, if there was no virus, of all people, Children's Health Defense would be warning us. What it's been like for the last 3 years. It's been like having another layer of government to have to deal with, to dispel all the nonsense coming out of your organization, because there's millions of people listening to you guys. So I'm sorry.
So I appreciate that. With all due respect, I brought on, Andy Kaufman and Tom Cowan to debate this with some of the other scientists who are on this call, and it wasn't as fruitful as I would have hoped. And like I say, this is still something that we want to hear. I'm sorry it's disappointing to you.
So that was bullshit. That was bullshit. So Mary, I got muted. I couldn't respond back to what she said, but you heard her saying that she had Tom Cowan and Andy Kaufman on. No, they haven't.
Oh, they
no,
haven't?
What had happened was Tom contacted Mary and tried to set up a debate. His proposal was that Tom and Robert would co-moderate a debate so that it's balanced. You have a moderator from each side, and the debate would be between Andy Kaufman and Mark Bailey on the no virus side, and Children's Health Defense should pick whoever their two strongest speakers are who want to argue that there is a virus. And that was quite some time ago, and it's still not set up, because the last we've heard, Robert wouldn't agree to it.
Well, there you go.
Or he doesn't have time for it, or whatever, right?
Well,
so
don't forget, he is running for president as well.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, come on, you're right. You have a whole book. You have time to write a whole damn book and continually put out, article after article. But I mean, come on. It's just ridiculous. So, but that was dishonest, what she's saying. Oh, she made it sound like they already had them on. No, they didn't. And it was Tom trying to set something up. But they do this sort of thing all the time. Like Steve Kirsch does it. Jay Couey does it. They try to make it sound like we've been so nasty, or we ran away from a debate, when it's the complete opposite is what's going on. So I'm a little worked up. I'll calm down now.
Well, but I think you have very good reason to be, because what we're finding now is that this, the talk about the injections, and how people manage the epidemiology all incorrectly, and masks and so on, everything except the idea that virology is in fact a fraudulent subject entirely. Yeah. And so you end up, without someone like you pushing this point very, very fiercely, people like me just can't get to hear about it.
Yeah.
And I, while I might agree vehemently with you, I don't go to get myself into the things that you're able to get to actually put the questions directly to the people the way that you have done. Mm-hmm. I just think you being able to do that is just outstanding, and I applaud you for it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I didn't even want to talk to her that day. I had a headache and I was very tired, which is partly why I got worked up. But I think it all worked out for the best. That they need to be backed into a corner, and that's what we're doing. Not to attack somebody, but just like, damn, if you're gonna put yourself out there as knowledgeable,
hold their feet to the fire. Yeah.
Yeah. And if this guy is going to run for president, possibly, like, we don't, I mean, I know they're all liars anyway, politicians.
Yeah. He's not going to save you.
He might
Well,
still
the
be
only
way
way
better than
the only
Trump, I
way
don't
you
know.
can tell if they're
First.
lying is if their lips move. You know that.
Yeah, exactly, right? So anyway, at least if he is going to become president, we'll do everything we can to expose him beforehand, at least on this issue to the extent possible. And that's not what we want to be doing. Like, we would rather work with these people. Like, let's all, yeah, like they say, oh, let's all come together. Let's unite. Yeah, but we can unite when you guys start telling the truth. We're not going to unite under baloney and pseudoscience. And I've heard a couple of people say, I've never actually read Agenda 2030, but I've heard people say that they're like planning, they want us taking something like 500 vaccines each by 2030. Like, I don't know if
Well,
that's such a number or
a
somebody
good,
exaggerated, but
yeah, a good chunk of the 17 SDG Sustainable Development Goals have vaccine written into them.
yeah.
I'm still going through the different sustainable development goals as has been discussed on Rumble with Mark Friesen. I think you know Mark Friesen from Saskatchewan.
Yeah. I don't, not terribly familiar, but I'm familiar with who he is.
Yeah, so it's all part of it. There's no doubt. I'll look that up. I actually have to download some of them because that is on a podcast called Acres for Truth. And they're up to number 13 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So they are talking about them.
Okay.
It's very interesting. And it is coming. Canada is fully signed up to it. And it is coming, but it's pretty disgusting what the
Yeah.
plan is. But I suppose if they have enough people willingly doing it, which I'm pretty sure there's still a good chunk of believers out there, sadly.
Yeah. Um,
What's your view on
someone's
why that is, Christine? Do you think people are willfully ignorant?
on the germ theory specifically, or more generally the
Well,
agenda,
let's
like the
just say the germ
globalist
theory.
agenda?
Let's just say the germ theory.
Oh, well, I can tell you, I have known for a while that there have been quite a lot of people, even like personal friends of mine, that frustrate me, that know, but they won't talk about it. Like, they still argue within the germ theory, like as if they don't know, and they know perfectly well. So I just want to shake them. But I've had, like, over the last 3 years, like, I've had emails here and there from doctors, even a lawyer, people saying, yeah, I can see what you're saying, and you guys are right, but like, they're not ready to go public yet. And I mean, there's been lawyers like Rocco Galati, for God's sake, he was on a roundtable with Andy. Yeah, with Andy and some other people back in 2020. And he's saying, oh, Dr. Kaufman, I've been following your work. And he was tweeting, yeah, the virus has never been isolated. He emailed me and he's like, oh, thank you so much, Christine. I'm going to use this in one of my next filings, right? Never did any of that. Never asked me for an affidavit. Stopped talking about it. Then on Twitter, he's saying, oh, every virus has at least 40 variants. Fuck off, Rob.
Well, if you want to read about his court filings, Christine, have you looked at canucklaw.ca?
Yes. She's Canuck Law is doing amazing work.
She's basically exposing these filings as complete incompetency, and the court is throwing all of them out. So the question is he incompetent, or is it a deliberate saboteur?
You know what's funny? Because I got totally sucked in by Rocco in the beginning. Like, I was promoting him. I was one of those people saying, oh, he's Canada's top constitutional lawyer. And I didn't know what the hell I was talking about looking back, but I just got sucked into all his talk.
Yeah.
And
Good talk.
yeah, he does. And what was I going to say? Oh, but that webinar that I mentioned from 2020, one thing, I'm pretty sure it was that one, but there was definitely one from him in 2020. And he said something that really stuck in my mind. And he said that when he was in law school, he had a nickname that the other students gave him, and they called him the Antichrist. I was like, what? What? And, I've always remembered that. And then, I don't know, like, I thought in the beginning when other lawyers were criticizing him, I thought, oh, it's just because they don't like what he's saying. But I don't know anything about legalities and how a pleading or whatever is supposed to be written up. And now, largely thanks to Canuck Law, I'm realizing it sounds like their criticisms were valid, you know. And yeah, who can respond to like a 400-page document? Like, you have to simplify it, you have to drill down and be concise, right, to make it fair for someone to respond to you. So and the fact that he just keeps going and going, and he's suing Canuck Law, he's taking them, and that whole thing is completely retarded. And I actually saw on his website, what is it called, Whole Heart Media or something? He has this website, a media, it sounded like he was planning on building some media empire. He was talking
Yeah,
that
he
way.
had that Indian girl that was interviewing him all the time.
Yeah,
He's the next Alex Jones, is he?
I don't. Well, he was planning on something. I don't know if it's really taken off or not, but they had an article about how he was suing Canuck Law, and it was the dumbest thing. It was really weird because it was so poorly written. It was full of typos. I couldn't believe they even put this on the website. But the weirdest thing was they quoted Rocco saying, because Canuck Law keeps asking questions, and I guess other people have maybe been asking questions like, Rocco, how come this lawsuit is going absolutely nowhere? Why didn't you ask for a judgment when the defendants never filed a claim or whatever it's supposed to be, a defense?
A defense. They didn't file a defense, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't follow, and he didn't follow up. He just left it. And it's like, okay. And so he said in this article, he was quoted as saying, "No one but my clients are allowed to ask me questions about cases." It's like, what the hell? Anybody can ask you a question. You know, you don't have to answer, but everybody can ask. But it was like he was just being a complete bully, trying to make people feel like, oh, can't even ask Rocco about his case. God forbid, maybe he's going to sue me if I ask him a question.
And I think he was involved in the so-called 2006 Ontario terrorism case, the Toronto 18.
Okay. I don't know about.
Well, the thing is, this is probably another psychological operation. So the idea that he's tied up with something like this makes it suspicious. This is another psyop, I would say, not a real thing, and it ties in 9/11, and they arrested men with 3 metric tons, 6,600 pounds. All the numerologies are in this case to help signal that this is just another complete fabricated story. So,
well, I had a colleague years ago. She was becoming very suspicious of him, and she thought that he had thrown purposely a case involving traditional Chinese medicine, that because they were being regulated, and the regulation, it's just a racket to destroy natural health.
Yes.
And so he was supposed to be helping these TCM people. And anyway, I mean, I got to be careful what I say, and I don't know all the details. I'm just saying that my colleague was becoming suspicious even back then, and I'm to the point I'm just like, screw you, buddy.
Well, we have to just be aware. We're not going to say he is. We're not going to make any accusations. We know that in psyops there are controlled opposition people placed everywhere, and their job is.
I think more importantly, if you are going to run a case like that, you've been told not to rent him because he's obviously no good at it, even if he is genuine.
Exactly. Yeah. Either way. Your friend Kevin has been making comments. He's asking about.
I don't know who Kevin is, so just so you know.
Sorry, your viewer.
Okay.
He's asking about. He's asking about Andrew Kaufman.
Andrew Kaufman is implying that Andrew Kaufman supports a germ theory. I don't think that's even vaguely true, is it?
No, you're complete. Yeah, Kevin, you're mixed up. It's the opposite if that's what you think. It was Dr. Andrew Kaufman who I first became aware of this whole virus isolation issue. He's one of my heroes. Like, he's one of the legends of the no virus. So I'm not really sure. He said my views were changed quickly by Dr. Andrew Kaufman's videos. Maybe I misunderstood. Weird how easily moved I was around the germ theory. He was persuasive. Oh no, I absolutely adore Dr. Kaufman. I don't know of any reason whatsoever to be suspicious of him in any way. He's one of the I was almost in tears once the first time I was on a Zoom call with him, and I said, like, if it weren't for you and Dr. Tom Cowan, like, I don't know how I would have survived 2020 because I would have gone crazy. But just knowing that they were there and they were on it so consistently, like explaining to people,
Yeah,
I
they're
would
very
have gone.
good. Christine Larkin, Texas says in the FacoTube chat, I don't think you can see that. It's on the screen here, though. It's a separate chat.
Okay.
It doesn't integrate
Okay.
with the restream. He says Mary Holland is a communitarian. RFK Jr. is a social impact investor and a fraud. Del Bigtree, the same. Are you familiar with communitarianism? This is really.
No, I've not heard of that.
Oh, yeah. You should maybe try and look at a couple of my shows where I'm trying to deconstruct communitarianism. It is the third way. It is the system they want to bring in under Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, SDGs, social impact investing. It's a blend, I would say, between capitalism and communism called communitarianism. See, nobody can quite describe what is coming because they say, no, it's socialism. No, it's communism. No, it's crony. Well, we're under crony capitalism, but it's private public partnerships. But the real word, I believe, is communitarianism. And once you study that, everything that's coming through is
it's really fascism, Matt, because it is government and private companies operating together. We've seen that now with the Australian Tax Department,
right?
Even
the IRS is a private corporation.
100%. These are private. The Australian government
and same with Public Health Canada.
Everything has been sold off. All the ports have been sold off. The railways, everything.
Yeah.
And even the registration of titles are private organizations.
Right, and it allows them to circumvent the laws.
Everything.
Right, everything.
And instead of being the Commonwealth of Australia, the government of the Commonwealth of Australia, it's called the Australian government. Who are they? Right. We don't even know who they are.
Yep. It's like McDonald's took over running the country. If they called it McDonald's, it would be more upfront. Where you must buy
so the interesting,
a Happy Meal every month.
Just on this topic, the interesting that happened in Australia now is that the Australian Securities Investments Commission has altered or appears to have now be hiding the fact that the ATO is owned by BlackRock and Vanguard. So that since our last talk, we've had an effect.
Wow. That's interesting. Wow.
Isn't it?
This show, people are listening to the show, you mean?
Well, it's either us or it's the guys who put it out in the first place. But they've altered one of the things I wanted to show you is that they've altered that. I'll put a link to that on.
You can show me if you want.
Yeah. Okay. Just bear with me. Keep talking amongst yourself.
I'm sure Christine is interested in this as well because Christine is really multifaceted in her interests. And I think we got you.
Definitely, Christine is.
Yeah.
Christine is so I've just got to share my screen
I would like
now.
to know more. I would like to be able to expose more about the courts too. Like I'm sure those are all corporations too, right? It's all private, for profit.
Oh yeah.
Well, again, and you would enjoy listening to the Know Your Rights group, especially their radio shows, Christine.
Okay.
The last 2 or 3 shows where they talk about the courts, how they work in Australia, and I would suggest, if it's not directly applicable, the parallels are quite clear.
Yeah. Know Your Rights, is that the name of their YouTube channel or?
Know Your Rights is a website in Australia.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the one I was looking at before. Yeah. I could be wrong, but.
Yeah. So I'm trying to share a screen here.
Yeah, go ahead, share it. By the way, your internet
so
connection tonight, Frank, is really poppy. I know you're on the other side of the world, but still.
Yes, it's the reason that it's poppy. I'd say I don't think my microphone's very good, but also we're using a wireless internet connection here. But can you see that?
Oh my God! Yeah. Okay, I'll take the I'll take the banner off the show so we can see the whole thing. Yeah, everything's looking good. We can see it.
So I'm now. Is the Australian Business Registry and ASIC hiding something from the Australian public? In a recent report here on Constitution Watch, we showed publicly available information that the Australian Tax Office is a trading name of the Ultimate Holding for All Company, and the entities behind the Ultimate Holding for All Company is BlackRock Investments and the Bank of America, just to name a few. As of March the 7th, 2023, so that's 3 days ago, the business name has been removed from the Australian Business Register, and the entities behind the Ultimate Holding Company for All, or the Ultimate Holding for All Company, have mysteriously been removed from the ASIC register. Why is the Australian government trying to hide this from the Australian public?
Good thing they got screenshots.
Wow.
Good thing.
Well,
So sorry, it's the
So-
is it the name? Which name has been removed? Is it the Australian government?
But what's happened is that if you click on the link above there, if you see this link here, Christine,
Mm-hmm.
who are the Australian Taxation Office? I'll click on that now to show you. This will have the original information that was held on ASIC, which is the Australian Securities Investment
Oh, okay.
Commission, and it says who are the Australian Taxation Office, and it will show you there that it is I beg your pardon, it has been completely removed. So the ultimate holding company for all.
well, you'd have to find screenshots.
Yes.
Or a Wayback Machine, maybe.
Oh, these guys will have it. I'll have to find it. We did screen it. In fact, it will be on Ab's last show with me, because we showed it on the screen.
Cool. It's so awesome though that like people are uncovering all this information and we have the internet to share it. Like,
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
how would people share this information years ago? Like,
They just did not, and they didn't have
Yeah.
to hide all this stuff because people couldn't get at it easily. So let's use the tool.
I'm sure this is a coincidence, but if you have a look at my screen, it says connectonline.asic.gov.au refused to connect. That's a coincidence, I'm sure.
Right.
hmm.
Yeah, the internet is down in that connection right now. That's amazing. Well, we do a lot of uncovering here, sometimes by accident, and maybe some people are paying attention. So this is a good show, I have to admit.
That's awesome.
We talk about a lot of stuff here. FakeoTube, I'm just looking at that. All kinds of stuff on there. We've got there's no other website like this website. We talk about the most likely staged train derailment to bring in this whole dioxin land grab. It's just amazing what could come from it if Tim Truth is speculating correctly. We've got stuff on the International Fake Station. Go ahead, Christine.
Okay, that's what Tim thinks, that it's a land grab. Is that,
Well, he's saying the point is that the guys that run this place, they play the long game. So they play chess, and they do things that don't make any sense now, but if you wait 20 years, they do make sense. So he's saying it looks like they may be setting up a situation where they can say the land is poison and you have to get off it, and they have super funds. I believe that's what it is. That the EPA will compensate you for throwing you off your polluted land with their phony tests to say your land is polluted, and people will go along with it because it's for their safety and for their health. And that's how they're just going to eventually, I suppose, corral all the people into the cities and get them off the land. That is the Agenda 21 end game. It's a long-term plan, but they don't want people on their own land wrecking Mother Gaia because they worship Earth.
right?
So this is a long-term plan, and it's hard to believe that a movie turned into a simulated train derailment is the pretext for all of this. But he is really extending himself, discussing all this and speculating. And hey, without
Mhm.
evidence, speculation's great. I love it.
Yeah, I haven't researched the train wreck much at all. I've just been concerned all along, like even if it was a real train wreck, that they're going to use it for, like they use everything. It's always an opportunity for them, whatever's going on,
Well,
and
yeah,
that they
they
will
make their own
have it.
opportunities. They don't just wait for
Yeah,
these things to happen. So that
right.
and they may as well stage it, like Frank said. What's the point in trying to make sure you actually derail a car at the exact right point? You just simulate it. It's
Um,
much easier. You can't
well, you know what?
leave things to chance.
One thing I found very curious, in addition to the movie, I've heard that the movie wasn't actually filmed right in the town; that it was filmed 100 or 200 miles away. But
Not
there were people
even.
in the
Not
town.
even. It was
Not
next
even.
door, the town next
Was it?
door.
Wow.
Yeah,
And
we
there were
looked that
people
up.
in East Palestine that were in the film. And
Yes.
the other thing is
By
that I found,
coincidence, Christine.
yeah,
By
of course.
coincidence.
The other thing I found really interesting is the fact that they rolled out these health ID wristbands just a few months prior. Like, what are the
Of course.
chances?
There's too many coincidences for it to be
Was it even
coincidental.
a few months? I thought it was only a few weeks.
Doesn't
I
matter.
saw
It was
an article. I saw an article from, I think it was October, that it had. I don't know how many
it was a
wristbands they
pretty
had
wimpy
given,
looking My ID system where people had
but mhm,
QR codes and they were going to have their medical records at the other side of the scanned QR code. The company that keeps their medical records, it's not even clear. But the point is they were just going to be barcoded. So for their safety, for their convenience. So when they're found writhing around on the ground, we know their complete medical condition and makeup so we can give them the right drugs, that
right.
kind of thing.
Well,
But
I'll definitely be.
yeah,
I wish there were more hours in the day to look into all this stuff.
well, it can get tiring, but uh, I don't know how you guys can do this full time, day in and day out. And personally, I just
Uh,
like to do it as a
yeah,
hobby. And so,
I
I was-
I got really burned out for a while there, but
oh
I'm
yeah,
starting
yeah.
to get my fire back a little bit.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone about 2 hours, Frank and I. Frank, you've been very patient at the beginning because I was just happy to get Tim Truth on. Didn't think he'd come by, but I want to give him a bit of a opportunity to discuss his series on the East Palestine train thing. And even though he is saying things that am interpreting differently with my media fakery glasses on, he said he doesn't see that coming out of his own research. So it's kind of funny how we all draw different things from different people's research. But I really appreciate it anyway because he's doing the hard work for sure,
Mhm.
digging up all these press conferences, and he's got a pretty good site. So I wanted to promote him best I could. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so
Well,
much
it was
good
great
truth out there.
connecting.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was good to connect. Good
absolutely.
to update. I
Yeah.
still really like, by the way, Catherine Watt's idea about the COVID kill box. I think she's right about that. I really do. I think she was the first one I've ever seen lay out the whole military infrastructure in the way she did. It was a really good presentation. Did you watch it, Christine?
No, I haven't. And that's
Oh,
why I
you
say,
really
like,
should.
I'm not even commenting on that side at all. That's not, it might be perfectly wonderful what she's doing. It's just
Yeah.
the
Oh, I
virus
see.
part and that's
No, I
all,
know that you're
So
you're very focused on that, but I really
exactly.
enjoyed her presentation. I put it on Faco too. I really think it's worth watching. Mainly because I haven't heard anyone discuss it like this. So here she is here. If you
Mhm,
just type Watt in the FacoTube at the top, you'll find
mhm.
part 1 and part 2. It's really well done. She really knows what she's talking about. We are probably at this site and this group among the very few people in the whole world, Christine, that has this whole picture. Because the thing I like to do is just to grab a puzzle piece here and from over here, and I'm assembling my own puzzle, and I'm using what I think are all the best researchers in their respective areas. So I don't
Mhm.
think I don't think anyone has the whole puzzle in their head the same way that
Oh,
we
no.
do. It's just impossible because we're all researching this
Yeah.
elephant. So you're specializing in this tiny part, and I'm over
Yeah.
here. I'm just trying to build this picture the best I can, and my contribution is to show you what I've found, and I put it on my own website, fakeologist.com/blog and Fakotube. That's what I do. So I think Catherine's got good research. You've got good research. There's overlap, but there's not necessarily agreement. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. No, we're just, like you said, holding people's feet to the fire when they mention, if you mention a virus, you'll hear from us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No,
All right.
that's great if he's doing good work. Oh, it was awesome talking to you guys.
Well, we're
And
trying.
it was nice to meet you, Frank. Nice to meet
No,
you.
it's a pleasure to meet you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you,
Okay,
Christine.
guys.
Keep up the good work. You definitely put your money where your mouth is. You really put yourself out there. So it's more than 99.9% of the world does. So we appreciate your work and your tenacity. And keep in touch and stay healthy.
Thank
Stay
you. You
sane.
guys too. Take care. Take care,
All right.
everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Christine. And Frank, good show.
Yeah, it was a terrific show. I was glad to be even peripherally involved. Thank you.
Well, I kind of hijacked the day because I invite people and they don't always show up. So you're obviously a convenient fallback, but I'm happy to get your sage wisdom and input, and I think you two had a pretty good interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%.
And of course, today was the first time you actually sent me an agenda that you wanted to talk about. So it was interesting. I was like, oh no, he's got a whole agenda for today's show.
Next time for sure.
Yeah, we'll get you next time. Well, that's the benefit of coming on weekly. And you may be around on the weekend where we do the audio chats with Be Told from Rick and the rest of the gang. So there's always that. So the audio
Terrific.
chat was a real banger last weekend, wasn't it?
Absolutely stunning. I thought one
And
of the most brilliant.
You were moved by it?
Just everything came out there. I think from I thought the spiritual discussion was at the very highest level.
Wow. And were you speaking in particular of any particular one?
Well, I just think all of the contributors put forward their views from their perspectives, and for me, it confirmed. Well, sorry, I found it to be confirming data that prayer is beneficial. The reciting the Lord's Prayer is beneficial, and that the Bible holds much to be grateful for. And I'm sure other people probably came to a completely different reading of the data that was presented. But I would certainly urge anybody who's interested in the battle of ideas with regard to spirituality to listen to that talk. I just thought the participants were on another level.
All right. Mysterious Awareness was the new voice. And of course, we had Dave J. And
11.7 was also a new voice.
11.7 was a new voice. A great find. Thomas J. brought him onto the scene. That was fantastic.
Thomas J's contributions invaluable. As I said, I probably cannot speak highly enough of that particular audio. It would be one of my
all-timers,
all-timers, without a doubt. Yeah.
And let's just look it up real quick so people can grab it from the show notes. I believe it was FAC 1230 11/7 meets Dave J. I thought those two would have a great connection, and I think they did for quite a bit of the show. So that'll be
Yeah.
show note number 9.
It reminded me of the discussion on marriage between Sarah and Marcus Allen's wife.
Oh, you
I thought
enjoyed
it
that
was-
one too, huh?
Equally. I mean, those two shows, of people really bearing their emotional and, I guess, logical views. They're two powerful shows. Probably this latest one I would rank above that other one, but another very powerful
FAK
podcast.
533. Was that the show? I wonder. I don't. Oh, well, maybe. FAK 531. Was that it? I'm not sure. So I'll just put a link to FAK 533, and it has a link to FAK 531. Maybe that's it. So I'll put that in the show notes as well. Okay.
Now I'll just bore you to let you know that my appearance at the Geelong Country Music Show was considered as a success, and I've been invited to perform again next year. So all of you in North America, you've got a year to get your tickets to come to the Geelong Country Music Festival next
All
year.
right. Okay. Do you have a video of that for your fandom?
I don't, but I think there's something on Facebook. I'll share it if people watch Facebook.
Okay. Well, if you want, send me a copy and we'll put it in the show notes.
Sure.
All right, Frank.
All right.
And if
Take
you
care.
want to get in contact with Frank at fakeologist.com, and you can give him feedback. Go to his website, howtotakecareofyourpenis.com. And everyone likes feedback, so make sure you send an email. All right. Thank you, Frank.
Take care.
All the best. And thanks, everyone here. Fakeologist.com, fakeotube.com. Remember, we're value for value. We can't do it without you. If you want to make a donation, fakeologist.com/donate. Donor box, PayPal, Epic Cash, Epic Pay, Monero, Bitcoin, cash in the mail, PayPal, Patreon. We got it all. Thank you, and good night.